So today, it is my pleasure to introduce today's presenter, Jared Thibodeau. Jared is a bilingual, cross-certified instructor with hands-on implementation experience and over 20 years of IT consulting and teaching experience. From instruction to courseware customization and development, Jared has the skills and out of classroom to ensure success. Jared teaches, is certified, and has authored courses in Windows, Windows Server, SharePoint, Systems Center, Cloud, VMware, and Hyper-V Virtualization. Jared, it's all yours. Let's begin.
Thank you for that, Brent, and welcome everybody. Hope we're all doing well and staying safe, of course, during these tough times, but kind of gives us an opportunity to take some additional training, try out some new products and technologies and learn some new stuff while we're all sitting at home in quarantine. So welcome everybody, and we are going to be talking about taking advantage of Windows PowerShell or Microsoft PowerShell and looking at some of the new tools that we have available to us with the ICE component. We'll look at how we can locate different commands, use help files to to find out what we can actually do with PowerShell, because as most of you probably already know, or those of you just getting into PowerShell, it's it's extremely powerful and useful product to assist us in starting to automate what we do, right, and simplify some of our administration. Now, it is a big learning curve, so I say simplify administration, but that comes with time and ultimately learning the product a little bit better, and really, understanding what limitations you have, but also what capabilities you have with PowerShell. And when it comes to things like administering Active Directory or servers and even client systems, I mean, we have this great capability to be very granular with our querying, our management and administration, and really target, numerous systems, one system. I mean, it really, gives us a lot of flexibility in how we administer. And what we're doing today is we're really just kind of covering the high level aspects of PowerShell, but of course there's different courses that are available that provide in-depth knowledge of both kind of introductory information about PowerShell, and then further, of course, into more advanced scripting and development. And nowadays with most of these products, I mean, everything from server applications to server operating systems, client operating systems, different products like Exchange and System Center, and even third-party organizations are now, providing, abilities with PowerShell. And this now ensures that we can start to administer those products, whatever products they might be, and whatever types of systems we have out there. Now, it was originally introduced back in 2006. We started to see heavy usage of it, or at least heavier usage of it in 2008 server. Now, with products like Server 2016, 2019, Windows 10, and of course all of the newer Exchange, SQL, System Center, any one of these products that fall under that Microsoft umbrella now support or even push you to be using PowerShell more frequently and more commonly day to day for your administration. Products like Exchange, we now see have about 40% of the configuration that we used to do through the GUI is now done through PowerShell, and some of it is required. It requires PowerShell to configure these certain components in your Exchange server. Now, when we look at PowerShell, it's an object-oriented language. So if you're familiar with other development languages that use that object-oriented structure, you're going to feel right at home, right? Commands are referred to as cmdlets, and they follow that verb versus the noun structure. So get me something, right? Get me a service or set me a service. And this is allowing us to, determine what the command does. And then further down our line of code, we can dictate, how to manipulate that command, right? Either that we're setting numerous objects, a specific setting, or we're querying numerous different systems for specific information, either through WMI or whatever Active Directory, whatever component we're looking to query. We can of course manipulate the output of that information, based on formatting, based on specific properties. You have so much control over how this information is retrieved. Now, it ships with core functionality, and ultimately you get kind of the default cmdlets and what we call modules. Now, modules ultimately dictate the commands that we have available to us. So they're referred here as extensions, but they are, really and truly, provided as modules, which include different commands and cmdlets and different parameters, and all of these, different, items that we can use with these PowerShell scripts to, of course, retrieve information from built-in features and built-in products. However, if I want to administer, let's say Exchange, well, I have to import the module for Exchange to include the different commands and parameters that I would use for that specific product. And that, of course, is available for pretty much any Microsoft product, and now even third-party solutions as well. Now, when we look at the different applications that we have available to us, there are two applications. And the first one, of course, is the most, it used to be the most common one used. And I really can't stress enough the need to move away from the old school PowerShell console. It really isn't very intuitive. It's an old shell that we've been using for the last, 10 years, give or take. And, it doesn't provide any syntax recommendation. It doesn't, provide me any help info as I'm typing my commands. So if I type a get, let's say AD user, you'll notice here that it's not providing me any syntax recommendations. If I do a space dash, it doesn't provide me with any parameter recommendations. And I'm kind of left to my own devices here trying to figure out how to write that script properly without any kind of assistance as I'm going through. Now, with the introduction of a product called PowerShell ICE, or the integrated scripting environment, Microsoft, provided us with a much more intuitive and powerful utility to begin scripting and developing our own scripts, code, whatever it may be. What you get with this ISE tool is a scripting pane. You get a standard console pane, and you also get what we call a command console or a command add-on. Now, if I wanted to know all of the different commands that I have on my machine, I could very simply, let me zoom in a little bit here for everybody. I could simply run a get command, and that's going to go out and locate, all of the different commands I have on my machine. So there's hundreds, thousands of these commands already installed on my system. And to do it this way is, kind of, difficult to find what it is I'm looking for. I've got to scour through all these different commands and figure out, the one for Active Directory that I'm looking for, and they're all over the place. So what I want is something to kind of give me a clear indication of what commands and what parameters I can use in PowerShell, and specifically for, let's say, Active Directory. So as you can see here, ICE gives me this little command tool, which I can target specific modules. And if I want to look at what Active Directory commands I have, I simply select that module, and there are all of the different commands specific to Active Directory that I have available on my system. As I scroll down, I'll see, all the different get AD user, get AD, computer. And if I want to retrieve user information with this specific command, I can select it and then show the details of my parameters to know what are my mandatory parameters, what are my optional parameters, and I could submit this information into my script or into my console by simply defining the parameters that I want. So if it's a get AD user filter based on, let's say, wildcard, and I choose to then run this, that's going to take that command, take the parameter I've defined, and insert it into my console and automatically run that query for me. So perfect. I really can do this more in a graphical fashion, but further to that is that when I'm using PowerShell ICE, I've got this great, this great tool called IntelliSense. And now IntelliSense is built in to your PowerShell ICE console. You can see here it's already started, it's running. So as I start typing my commands, let's say get-AD, you'll notice here what it's doing is it's providing me with syntax recommendation and command recommendations, right? So even if I just were to do a get dash, there are all of my get commandlets that I have available on this machine. Not only my Active Directory, but I've got AppLocker, BGP, everything that has a get dash before it. And then if I'm typing get dash AD user, right, this is going to start targeting AD based, objects. And then if I start typing U, then there's my user. I can tab through Then I go into my parameters and I do a dash, and look what it does. It provides me recommendations for these parameters. This is a great learning tool for anybody looking to get into PowerShell who isn't very familiar with all the different commands. And there's thousands. You can't remember all of them, right? So you need some assistance in kind of finding this stuff. You may know that there are AD commands out there, but which one you're looking for, you may not be clear on. So by using this IntelliSense, it's helping you through that. It's basically giving you guidance as you're building your code. Very useful. Now, the ICE tool, I cannot stress enough just the benefit of this utility. It's got, everything from debugging tools, breakpoint management. I mean, it's, the old console is really a thing of the past. And if you're still using this, it's usually for very ad hoc commands that you're running, really quick. But in reality, if you want to be getting into PowerShell, then the ICE tool is really what you need to be working with. It's free. It's included on all of your operating systems, including Windows 10 and your client OSs. Why not use it? If it's there, you might as well take advantage of it, right? Now, when we look at what versions we work with. I mean, every organization has newer versions of OSs, newer versions of systems in PowerShell. We need to understand what's supported. Now, the great thing is that even though all of the versions are not installed in every system, we do have support for and compatibility with older versions. So by going into PowerShell and quickly running something like a PS $, which is what we call an automatic variable or a built-in variable, a PS, a $PS, and if we want to just do a quick version table, this is now going to tell us what's supported, what's compatible, and I can see here I can work on versions as far back as version 1, right up to version 5.1, which is what's currently installed on this machine. So if I've got scripts that are older, I can run them and it doesn't have any impact. It will still function as required. Now, you do want to be using the 64-bit preferably, but obviously if you're having, running it on a 32-bit platform, you can run the x86 designated version of PowerShell, and that just ensures that you're working with a compatible version on that operating system. Now, when we looked at the ICE, you can, of course, modify font, screen size, your font sizing, your colors, all of these different items can be modified. And as I mentioned, it's just a great tool. It includes debugging and all types of different capabilities that we just don't get with the old PowerShell console. Now, when we're looking, to start getting into PowerShell, we need to understand the command syntax. We need to understand that there are limitations to what we can do, and and Michelle, I kind of noticed one of your questions there about ICE being switched over to Visual Code, and that's something that Microsoft is now coming forward and saying that there is a good possibility that they will be deprecating and kind of getting rid of that ICE over the next few versions of Server and moving over to VS Code. And I have tried VS Code. It is okay, but I do definitely think that it is much more of a development tool for developers than it is an administrative utility for administrators. And this is, something that you need to look at because it's a very deep console. It provides, unbelievable capabilities for all types of languages supported in Visual Studio. Sorry, let me close that here. But as we can see, even though it does support PowerShell, it is very, much more complex than the standard ICE tool that we use. And, again, it comes back to preference and familiarity with PowerShell and other languages. It is, something that we may see as a replacement to ICE over the next little while. So who knows? We'll have to wait and see. Microsoft does change quite frequently. Now, coming back to this, I mean, the verb versus the noun, right? Get me a service, set me a process, right? And if we're dealing with specific products, we have prefixes that designate what it is we're working with, right? So is it Active Directory? Are we working with SharePoint? Is it Azure AD? And most of these products come with a prefix. System Center uses CM for Configuration Manager. You've got many of these different prefixes that designate what it is we're actually working with and where we're running these commands. Now, parameters ultimately will modify what those commands do, right? So if I'm doing a get AD user and I filter, use the filter parameter, it's getting my users and then using that parameter to adjust my query as to what I want to see, right? And then this is where we really can start to manipulate the type of information. And Visual Studio can be used for PS development, yes, Syed, and we also, PowerShell 7 now, of course, the newest version, will support previous versions in 5.1. Absolutely, you can support older versions of PowerShell within PowerShell 7. Now, tab completion is nice because it allows you to quickly go through and kind of tab complete. Sometimes it works, sometimes it's a little trickier because you've got lots of commands you're going through and there's tons of parameters. So it can take you a little bit longer to find what it is you're, by tabbing through, which is why, ICE gives you that recommendation, right? And provides you kind of guidance in which, what you need. Now, the get help, of course, will give you a ton of information about commands and information associated to, different parameters within those commands. So if I want to, let's say, for example, go out and get help for the set network adapter cmdlet, what I can do is simply run a get help for set net adapter. I prefer to run this with a show window myself so that I can actually pop out all of the help information. So I'm now going to run this, and we should see a little window pop out now. That gives me some assistance on, the command usage and, different parameters that I can use, pipeline input, all of that good stuff is defined within my show help. And, this gives me the ability to quickly go through, excuse me, and, find the different properties, parameters that I can retrieve and how to use them. And it should give you some insight to how to write your syntax as well. So you get some, kind of idea of how to use it, how to better, write your script and what parameters to use and what type of information that they're looking for, right? So we just kind of spend a bit of time doing that. So now, when we go back into, our console, we might want to, go out and find information about different firewall rules, different commands. One of my favorite, tools here is also the get member. Now, a get member allows me to look at the different properties and methods associated to a command. So let's say I wanted to find out some information about what types of properties I can retrieve from my, excuse me, I've got a bit of a frog in my throat here today. Based on, let's say, get AD user. So what I can do is do a get AD user, and I want to see the properties that I can, retrieve about users. So I pipe that into a get member, right? And that's going to then allow me to look at all the different properties and items that I can query when I'm looking at getting AD user information. So another really important command here, I'm going to filter that on wildcard, and then now I can see the different properties that I can retrieve associated to that specific command. So the get member is also extremely helpful when you're looking, to find out information about different commands and properties and so on that we have out there. So, once we're getting into, let's say, any one of these commands, we go through our help, we interpret, how that parameter is going to be used. And then we're going to go ahead and, of course, start to use that syntax in our own scripts to define, structure and, what information we're retrieving or what configuration we're defining. Now, another extremely important piece of your kind of, learning experience is the about files. Just bear with me here. I just got to clear my throat. My apologies. So the about files are basically a giant list of files that we can use to retrieve, information about any aspect of PowerShell that we're looking to learn about. Now, the great thing about this is that all of these help files are now much better documented online. So when you go online, you're going to find a bunch of these, kind of defined within the Microsoft Docs websites, and there's, of course, tons of different sites out there with PowerShell, guidance and assistance. But if you're working in PowerShell and you just want to quickly find out some information about, let's say, variables, or, really about anything, that you're using within PowerShell, you're going to run a get help and then about underscore. What that's going to do is it's going to retrieve all the different about files that we have currently available on this system. Now we can see, a bunch of different help files now loading up, ranging from, everything from workflows to WMI, variables. We look at everything from splatting to, run with PowerShell, script blocks. So if I want to learn, let's say, something about variables, what are variables? How can I use them? what benefit will they be to me? So I'm then going in and I'm running the get help about variables, and that's now going to return to me a bunch of information about, variables and their usage, how to define variables, how to, what type of information can be stored in a variable. And these become, these about files can be extremely useful to, helping guide you and learn about different aspects of PowerShell that you may not be, completely clear on. So use them to your benefit. And like I said, I mean, there's hundreds of these, there's quite a few of these different about files. And, they periodically update them as well. So if you're downloading new help content, you can, of course, see the new help information that might be added depending on which version that you're using. So, great little tools just to kind of, help you kind of build to, learning a little bit more about PowerShell. Now, as we start to get into kind of more advanced commands, we have to, we talked about modules and, finding commands as we looked at, the get command, the get help, and also, of course, the get member is going to give you a lot of information about what these commands can do and what limitations they have as well. Now, the nice thing for those of you guys who've been working in, command line for years and you're just new to PowerShell, this is going to allow you to go in there and run old commands that you're familiar with, your pings, your IP configs, the standard stuff that we've used, trace routes, all that good stuff. These are aliases that, refer back to the standard commands that we previously used. So they are at least something that we can, continue using, but we should really start looking at, which PowerShell commands they represent and try getting familiar with those as well. Now, show command, as I've kind of, demonstrated earlier, this is included directly in your PowerShell ICE console. So you don't have to do this much anymore if you don't want to, but if you add the show command, parameter at the end of a command, this will, of course, pop this little box out for you and give you some kind of graphical representation of your parameters and so on. Now, as we start to kind of, query information, we want to also start looking at how we can output that information and manipulate it in a format that's usable, right? Something that we want to be able, that we can use, properly. So we've gotten so many different capabilities when we start getting into the pipeline. And the pipeline is our ability to take information, in our first initial commands, store it in memory, and then pass that information down to the next subsequent line of commands. And what this ensures is that we can get what we need, take it, and then, sort it, or, select specific object properties, or, set specific configuration, settings on those systems, or on those, based on that command that was run. So what I'm doing is I'm, going in, and let's kind of demonstrate how this is done. We're going into the, a command, and let's say, for example, I want to, get, some hotfix information. I want to find out some patch info on this machine, and I want to know, the hotfix ID that's currently installed on this machine, and I also want to know, what, who, when it was installed and who installed it. So I'm going to go ahead and first I'm running a get hotfix. That's first going out and finding the hotfix, any hotfix I have on my machine, and storing that in memory. Then I use my straight brace as my pipe character, and I'm piping that into a select object where I'm looking for specific properties. And the properties I want to retrieve are the hotfix ID, installed on, and installed by. Now these properties, right, are based on the get member property, and going in and looking at what properties are available for a get hotfix. Now we can retrieve numerous properties if we want, and we can even modify those properties. So if I do a get member, that's going to show me all the different properties that I have available when I run a get hotfix command. So I can see, caption, description, installed by, so on. So I'm taking that and I'm then retrieving specific properties that I know are available to me within that command. That should then go out, find the hotfix ID, tell me when it was installed and who installed that update, right? So this is just different ways. And, these are different ways that we can now kind of manipulate how that information is output. Further to that, we can also start to, create our own properties that could be later used by other commands. So in this case here, what we're using is what we call a hash table. It's a little more advanced for this kind of, introductory webinar. But, with that said, it's kind of nice to see that what we've got is we've got a same get hotfix command where we're looking to select object properties, same one hotfix ID. However, instead of using the installed on property, what we've created here is an expression and a new property. Now, the name, which is really what that N represents, is that we're creating a new property called hotfixage. The expression that we're using to create this new property is that we're taking a new time span. That time span is going to use the start and the property from what we call the PS item automatic variable. Now, this PS item allows us to call different properties and use those properties to manipulate the information, right? In this case here, instead of us just having the installed on date, we want to calculate a time span from the date it was installed on and the number of days since then. So this little expression is basically going out, finding that property, and then calculating how many days it's been since it was installed in that machine. And then we're closing up our little filter script here, and then we're doing an installed by. So we're actually adding that additional property at the end. So what this is simply going to do is now create a new property for me. That property being called hotfixage, and we can see that it's 1,086 days old, right? So this now kind of changed that information for us. And that's how we can manipulate data within the pipeline and determine how that information is then, piped out to us at the end. And we can do that in many different ways, right? The pipeline character, the pipeline can be extremely useful for, maybe let's say we want to go out and we want to, retrieve all users within Active Directory, filter it based on wildcard, but we want to target in our search only the users container within the adatum.com domain component. And then we want to pipe that into a format in table. Now, this is a simple formatting where, we're just changing it from format list to a format table. And that's then going to go out and target all those users within that specific, OU, or in this case here, a built-in container. There are my objects. Now I can take that and say, I want to do the same kind of filter, but I'm not going to restrict my search base to just users. I want to find all Active Directory users whose properties, department and city, and I want to retrieve those, those properties, but I want to pipe that into a where object. So this again is just a where object statement. They've kind of shortened it up here. And I want to look at the PS items, department. So now I'm calling the properties using the PS item variable, or automatic variable, and I'm now calling the department attribute, and I want it to be equal to IT. And I'm also calling the city attribute being equal to London. So again, this filter script here is saying, only find me the objects whose department are IT and they're in the London city, which they've defined against their Active Directory object. And then select those objects and bring back the properties, name, department, and city, and sort them by name. So we've got 3 different pipelines here going down and taking the initial information, passing that down to a where object, which is then retrieving the properties we're looking for, and then piping that into a select objects, retrieving those properties, and then sorting them, and sorting those objects based by name. So if we run this little script, it should now retrieve all those objects, in Active Directory that have an IT department in London. Right? We see those objects there. Now, of course, this becomes really even more useful when we start to convert that information into exportable, CSV files and HTML files for reporting or, object moving, whatever it may be. We can, start to, heavily use, this information in any format we want. Now, we've got format list, we've got format table, format wide. And one of the nice things about PowerShell is they also offer what we call an out grid view. And this is something I really quite like. Let's say, for example, we filter based on all AD users, and I want to go in and format that in table view. Well, based on the real estate I have in my window here, that's going to limit the results that I see. So if I go ahead and I run this, that's going to go out and find all Active Directory users, put them in a table for me. But I can see here, all it's done is it's retrieved each user, their name, whether it's enabled, what type of object, and then I can see the beginning of their grid, but I see an ellipsis here, which indicates that there's more information that I'm not seeing on my screen. Now I could format that in list format, and I would see the different attributes, but it's a little tougher to kind of go back and look through thousands of objects in a list view inside PowerShell. So why not, instead of doing it that way, we could do a format table, and then we could pipe that into an out grid view, something like that, where, we're now being able to, format that information. Let me just kind of bring this up into, let me just, instead of formatting it that way, let's do an out grid view here. And what that does, now is it allows us to output that information in a nice little table, as opposed to it being, kind of presented to us right inside the screen. Inside PowerShell, we're presenting that in kind of a more tabled view. And that's going to be useful, whenever you're looking to, ensure that you're able to kind of look through those objects properly and not be kind of stuck, with, looking at them in PowerShell. So I'm just going to go ahead and outgrid that, put that into an outgrid view here, and watch how nice these results are. You get this nice little Excel spreadsheet style window. It shows me all of the objects, and it also shows me all of the object attributes. There's my SIDs, my GUIDs, my names, my user principal names, and I can use this as well to filter and add additional criteria. So if I know I'm looking for someone with a specific surname, or whether or not, which objects are enabled or not enabled, I can go in and start defining this criteria, and I can even start to filter objects as well based on, specific, object attributes and what have you. Great little tool when you're dealing with a lot of information. Unfortunately, you can't export anything from here. It would be great if you could just come in and, export to CSV or do something like that, but you'd have to do that in a different manner. And that's using what we call an out to file, which instead of an out grid view, we're now going to convert this information into maybe CSV or HTML. Every one of those, you can do it in XML if you want to, JSON files, many different, variations that you can use. And just a quick question. Okay, so I'll come back to those questions in a few minutes here, guys. So I just want to finish this up now. We've looked at, what we call a hash table. The label or the name defines the property we're creating, and the expression defines the contents. And we can use either PS item or the representation of $_ which is the equivalent of a $PS item as well. Okay, so we looked at the hash table, very useful for that. And now we want to look at maybe sending some pipeline, data as output. This is where we're now, again, we can output to a file. We can append information by using a dual brace, or we can simply overwrite the file contents with a single brace. That allows us to go in and add content to those files. It could be a CSV. We're converting or exporting to CSV. It's good for Excel and so on. You've got CLI XML, great for web-based services, web applications. It's portable, multi-valued properties become individual entries. And JSON is compact. It does need to be converted before it can be used by both PowerShell, or when it's exported out to JSON, it needs to be converted to prior. But it's compact, it's ease of use, and it's formatted kind of like a hash table. Now, the one that we're going to use here is the convert to HTML. So I'm going to run that same query where I've got, get AD user, filter, based on wildcard. I want the properties, department, city, and office. And then I'm going to open up a filter script where, piped into a where object, I'm looking for the department IT, city equal to London, and then I'm sorting by name, and I'm selecting those object properties, name, department, city, and office, and then I'm piping that into a convert to HTML where the properties I want are the name, department, city, and I'm adding a pre-content, which is basically a row, a top row to identify the, the file, the row header, let's say. And then I'm outputting that into a user report.html. So we've got like 4 different pipes that we're using here in this command to go out and pull that user information and then convert it into an HTML file for us. If I go ahead and I run that command, should pop all those objects into a CSV file that we just created. And now I'm going to invoke an expression and call that HTML file that I just created. So if I go ahead and run that, invoke it, pops open my browser, and there's my little HTML file that I can then, of course, use for whatever reasons, reporting, import, export, all of that good stuff. Very useful, and of course, used by many for many different reasons, right? So as we saw, we've got the out grid view, really nice. You could, of course, get this nice spreadsheet list of information. Out host puts, gives us control on the screen, and out printer, of course, is obviously going to send it to a printer for you. Now, when we talk about remoting, this is something that many organizations need. They do a lot of remoting on their systems, remote administration, which of course is going to be paramount to a lot of administrators, especially now that many of us are working from home, right? So We have different variations of remoting, and the nice thing is that, we used to use one-to-one remoting by having to enable a PS session and then enter a session. And it's kind of the old way of doing things. With ICE and the PowerShell ICE tool, as well as the new Visual Studio Code, you have the ability to use a remote PowerShell tab to initiate a connection to a remote machine. It's a little safer, and it's also a little more consistent with organizational policies for security and what have you. So first we need to make sure that remoting is turned on. Now this is either done two ways. You can do what we call a Windows RM quick config, which is going to go in and automatically turn on the firewall, and of course go in and enable the services and turn them on. Or you can run enable PS remoting, and that's going to allow you to do the same thing, and it turns on all the required firewall ports and turns on the service and gets it going. Now it is enabled by default on servers, but is not enabled by default on your client operating system. So if you are administering clients, you do need to ensure that you're running these commands to enable. Now this can be done, of course, through GPOs to kind of blanket the environment, but it's a matter of you kind of figuring out the best way to do this for the organization. So Karen, just regards to UAC, when it comes to UAC, PowerShell does require elevation if you're using, you're performing administrative actions. And depending on the administrative account you have that you're logging on to that client machine, you may run into the problem where your administrative account doesn't have, a permission to run PowerShell. So you might have to elevate using user account control or blanket a policy through GPOs that turns off user account control for PowerShell. Really depends. Now, remoting is ultimately a term that Microsoft uses for not only remoting within PowerShell, but other remote technologies as well. And in this case here, we're using PowerShell remoting to connect to a specific system. Now you can run commands that target the computer name parameter, and you can say, I want to run this command on London DC1, but that doesn't mean you're in a remoting session with that server. It just simply means that you're running that command against that system. Now, what we need to do is also look at security, because especially now, if a lot of us are working from home, connecting in through PowerShell over a VPN or over a network, internet-based transmissions, we probably want to ensure that any of that information is being encrypted in transit and while we're communicating with those systems. So using SSL, as well, or multi-factor authentication, even the domain credentials and SSL certificate-based authentication is always going to ensure that you've got a little more security in, of course, communicating. Preferably, you'd want to be doing this through the VPN, of course, to really provide that, additional layer of security while you're remoting. Now, it's fairly straightforward to set up, enable. So let's look at it from a one-to-one kind of configuration here. And, when we're doing a one-to-one, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, it's kind of obsolete now within PowerShell. Again, it's not hard to do, and some will still do it this way, but most will use what we call a remote PowerShell tab. And this is included in ICE. And as you can see here, I've got a little button on my ribbon, and I've also got a little item in my drop-down menu that allows me to jump to a remote PowerShell tab. That then allows me to define the system name that I'm connecting to, in this case here, London DC1, and I'm connecting in as administrator. And of course, it's going to then prompt me for my password. In I go. I've now authenticated to that server to ensure that I have the credentials and the ability to run certain commands. My ability is only, as much as my credentials allow, right? So if I'm not permitted to modify objects in Active Directory, even though I can connect to the DC, I may still not be able to, change user account information or modify group memberships. Again, even though I have access to it, doesn't mean I have permission to do it, right? And it's still based on my credentials. Hence the importance of things like PowerShell remote tabs, because you can see here, now I've gone in and I've connected to my domain controller. I was authenticated, but I could do this a different way, the old way, which is first to enable PS remoting on my client computer. So I'm going to enable that. It's going to open up the Windows RM services, turn on my firewall exceptions. Everything is good now. Windows RM is up and running. I'm now able to begin remoting to those systems. Now you'll notice that I didn't have to do that to launch into DC1 with a remote PowerShell tab. However, if I'm doing that this way, I have to do it, I have to ensure my services and firewalls are ready. Then I can go in and enter a PS session with computer name London DC1. So now I'm in set, as soon as I run this command, I'm exactly in the same type of session that I am on my remote PowerShell tab, except if you'll notice, it didn't, prompt me for credentials, right? Now, in this case, what it's doing is it's using pass-through credentials. So it's using the credentials I'm currently logged on with to provide me access. But in most cases, I would want to prompt for credentials because my admins are using different accounts. So in this case here, now I'm in session, the same as I am in my remote tab. However, anything I'm now typing is being run remotely on that server. So the performance and the resource consumption, if I'm running big queries or whatever it is that I'm querying out there, I'm using the server-based resources to do this. Sometimes that's beneficial, especially when you're running large queries that can consume a lot of server resources or system resources. Yes, in Windows 2008, it's not enabled by default. You're correct on that, Alan. And there are differences between PowerShell on Windows and Linux, and it's really just the commands that are available. But you do have to install, of course, PowerShell on Linux to be able to support that as well. So now we've entered a session, but the problem is that if I forget to exit this session and I just keep typing away on commands and I keep doing certain things, there is a chance that I inadvertently run a command on that remote server until I exit that session. So now I have to exit that PS session to get now back to my original console command line. Whereas with the remote PowerShell tab, all I simply have to do is close the tab. And once I close that tab, I'm out of that session. So I find it much more consistent with my organizational configuration and security requirements. So this is something that I would definitely recommend over using it the old way here. But just a matter of preference, and this is something the way I do it. Now you can do one to many. So in this case here, let's say for example I wanted to run a command against multiple different systems or even an array of systems, right? Right now, we only have 2 systems in that we're going to target, but I could create an array of hundreds of machines, right? To be able to go in and manipulate those objects with a, let's say, get network adapter and physical. Now in this script block here, what that's doing is it's allowing me to run whatever I've got contained in that script block against these numerous systems. And what I'm doing here, yes, Andrew, and I agree. It is much easier to type, absolutely. But I think just for those who are newer to it, it's good to see kind of the full, the full command. And here what I'm doing is I'm now running this command against all of those remote machines in one shot. And so now that command is going to go out and retrieve all those network adapters from both of my systems at the same time. Now I can do much more complex things than that. We can run extremely complex commands and scripts within these blocks to actually go out and modify a couple 100,000 servers if we need to at the same time. Now, when we talk about what we call implicit remoting, this is me connecting directly to a system to be able to obtain things like modules and use its modules on my system, but calling that remote machine. So if I did an implicit remote, let's say against my domain controller here, I would first define a variable, the $DC being equal to a new PowerShell session, and the computer name I'm connecting to is London DC1. So if I go ahead and define that variable, I'm going to go ahead and use that variable now to establish my remote session. And there's my session ID. We're connected, open, available. And now what we're doing is we're going to go in and look for a module that we want to retrieve. In this case here, for a module that has the word share in its name. So I'm going to go in and list all available modules. We see that here. Now I've got a list of 1, which is get SMB share, which is what we call the SMB share module. And that should then, of course, pull that object back. It's a little bit slow today, so bear with me here. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to import that module for SMB share onto my machine, but I'm going to provide a prefix to that module because I already have an SMB share module on my own system. So I want to call this DC SMB share. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to give that module a prefix of domain controller, or DC. And then I'm going to import that in. That module gets imported onto my machine. And now I can go in and say, get DC SMB share. And what that's going to do is it's going to get the share information from the remote machine and not my local. If I run this command, I should see all the shares located on my server. And again, if I remove that DC prefix, I would see all of the SMB shares on my local computer. So you can see that here. Now I've got all these local shares on my machine. This allows me to then, go in and pull, all of those, modules and different commands from different systems if I need to be able to, run those commands from my machine to those remote systems. Now, of course, we have to remember that if we are in session, like we have established here with this new PS session, that session exists in the backend, right? It's in the background and it's running, and it does not close necessarily when we close PowerShell. So that we run the chance of, if we, again, close PowerShell, log back in, jump back into it an hour later and then run a couple commands, not realizing that we still have an established session with that server that needs to be closed. And we could inadvertently run commands against it. So I'm going to go ahead and remove that session, make sure I'm out and I'm no longer connected to that domain controller. I'm good to go, and now can continue on working locally. So this is our remoting, and guys, we have a limited amount of time, in the hour-long time frame that we have here, to really look at, every aspect. I mean, I could spend, I spend 5 days just on a tip of the iceberg of PowerShell, let alone, getting into the depths of it here. So, I hope to provide you guys with a kind of a brief overview of some interesting features. And of course, we've got offerings that provide much more in-depth knowledge and much more in-depth, ability. Now, I'm going to try and answer some questions for everybody here, because I see a bunch are in there. Now, of course, there are limitations to PowerShell. I'm not going to go through every one of these because we've kind of gone through the majority of this through demonstration. But you can add additional remoting commands, like using SSL, defining specific ports or credentials to use. And we also have the ability to, again, as we saw, invoke commands, right? Without, actually having to establish a PS session, we can pass that information, and those commands over to those remote computers by using script blocks, and actually, defining what we're looking to pull or configure against those remote systems. Now, multi-hop remoting, you can only go one-to-one. There's no, beyond one machine. So you're kind of, stuck going one-to-one, and that's it. All right, so guys, let me just get to the end of this here, because we've looked at all the PS sessions. We've also talked about making sure that we, disconnect or exit those sessions as well. We looked at our implicit remoting, and we also, went through a brief demo there. So I'm just going to try and answer as many questions as I can here in the next 5-10 minutes here. I know we've got a limited amount of time, and so I've seen some newer questions come up here. And can you set up more of these sessions with varying levels of PowerShell? You can set up as many sessions as you want. You have to remember that, these sessions are active in the background. So you could be running multiple, you could have multiple PS sessions running, and allowing us, different connectivity to different systems in the background. The really important thing, Maurice, is to make sure that you've exited those sessions after the fact. You can exit them based on name or ID, or just kill them all, right? The timeout there is a defined timeout for Andrew for your sessions within remoting, and the default is anywhere between 5 to 10 minutes. And your idle time, it'll kick you out of those sessions after a specific time. That's not always guaranteed, and that idle time can ultimately be adjusted for your specific requirements within the organization. Yes, absolutely. Tareen, you can use PowerShell to go in and report user moves, deletes from files from a file server. Again, you'd have to develop a script to go out and pull the information from the file objects, and track, ultimately what's been deleted, moved, so on and so forth, based on specific attributes. Is there a difference between share and share? Yes, absolutely. Well, sometimes Fareed, it does have an effect. The different sessions, share versus share. I just always use my dual stars just to ensure that anything contained within those stars is identified as the wildcard. Okay, this just identifies the exact word that we're looking for. If I were to do a single star with an S, let's say, that would of course allow me to target any value that has just the letter S in it, right? Fareed, because related to variables, different between FK 50 second, FK1, and FK3. Hello. Yes, absolutely. As long as the variable names are unique, and whatever values contained within the variables are unique to that specific variable naming. Okay. Let me just see here. Does PS support managed identities? Yes, you can have managed identities. Leo, sorry for that. Let me see here. What does this have for Linux or Mac OS X? So there is cross-platform support for both Mac OS X and Linux. You do have to install PowerShell on Linux, Unix-based platforms, and there is some good walkthroughs out there. Let me just see if I can quickly find one on Unix. There's some for Unix, Linux here, and I think we were actually talking about this last week. You do, using PowerShell core on Linux, you can do it, and there's some good walkthroughs out there. Quick Google search will show you how to download it. Here's a good one from Starwind for, let me put that in the chat window here for everybody. Make sure all panelists and attendees can see that in my chat here. There you go. Yeah, manage identities. Yes, okay, so we've got through that. I'm just going to see here. Yes, you can have multiple lines of commands and pipelines, Leonard, within PowerShell ICE. So you're just simply creating line by line within your scripts, and you're off to the races, and you can have as many pipelines as long as the pipeline input is accepted, right? Yes, so we answered pipeline. Yes, we answered that. I'm just looking to make sure I've. Yeah, so just for read, the $_ is ultimately is the same representation, just a shortened version of a $PS item. So this is allowing us to kind of shorten up our scripts and kind of simplify, make them easier to write and easier to develop over time. It's just a shortened variation of the $PS item automatic variable. All right, let me see what else here. I'm kind of looking at as many as I can. There's quite a few here, guys. So I don't know if we'll be able to get all of them before I've got to step back into my course here. Yeah, Fareed. So that's a pretty involved little script, but it's fairly straightforward to go out and pull. He'd have to do a get member, find out the properties that he wants, like the IP, the operating system tag. You would normally use WMI for those types of queries, and then you would be able to retrieve that information for IPs. There's some good scripts out on the web. Check out the Microsoft's TechNet PowerShell library or script library. It's a really quite a good one. Let me see if I can bring it up for you guys. I'll give everybody a link to this in the chat window. It is definitely the best gallery of, it's called the Script Center, and there are over 16,000 different scripts in here, that probably pertain to exactly what you're looking for. So I will dump that in here to everybody, and it's in the chat window. There's a link to the Script Center. Check that out. It's really worth its weight in gold. Gives you access to 16,000 different scripts out there, and really, helpful when you're dealing with, trying to find scripts that do the task that you're looking for. Let's see here. How do I create shortcuts in another folder and files, source folder with certain extensions? So again, John, that would be something we'd have to develop. It's a little more advanced than what we have time for here, but you can, of course, create folders with additional extensions and requirements for this. For that, let me just go through and make sure. Levels of PowerShell, yes. Okay, let me see if I've missed any here. I'm trying to see as they come in here. Can all Microsoft Server products be managed through PowerShell? Most nowadays, yes, but I would say that you kind of have, it's hit or miss, but yes, Exchange, SharePoint, System Center, all of these products include some variation of administration through PowerShell. Yeah, you can update, David, your PowerShell modules and help files, which periodically get updated so that you, of course, get the most current information. When setting up ZAC GPO to enable remoting, is it a per user policy or does it apply to any user on the system? That's determined based on whether you apply to the user or the computer configuration. More often than not, we would maybe apply this to the computer, but you can also do it to the user. So it's either one. It's just based on the PowerShell component for your group policy settings for that. Okay, so we've answered that. Let me see what else I've got here. See if I can get a couple more in. What are we time-wise? 55. So I think we're almost about kind of at the end here.
Hey, Jared, let's take one more just to respect everyone's time. I know you've got to get back to class as well, so
okay, sure.
I'll let you select your final question.
Yeah. And I'd love to run a script for you for SharePoint, but I don't have any currently here. You can get data, Jeff, for Power BI reports, absolutely. And there's so much more that you guys can do. I mean, I really wish we had more time. It's, I teach this course almost once or twice a month because there's so much interest. And so, see if you can hop on, some of our sessions. They're fantastic, really give you deep insight to better PowerShell usage. And yeah, guys, it's a short time frame to kind of tackle such a big topic. I know there's probably tons of other questions that, would be, what people would like to have answered, but we just have so little time. But I do hope you found some benefit. Guys, you can always pick up on some of these additional tools out there, and I think that they will be sharing not only the slides, but some of the information for you guys, within the course. So best to everybody. I wish you all a great rest of the week, and of course, stay home, stay safe. Hope everyone is doing well and staying healthy at this time, and wish you all the best.
Thank you so much, Jared. Really appreciate you joining us today. And thanks everyone for attending. Fantastic engagement, fantastic questions. I know some didn't get answered, and so I would encourage you to reach out to Global Knowledge, Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn. We even have an Instagram. So any of that stuff, reach out to us and we should be able to get answers for you. So again, I hope everyone enjoyed today's webinar. If you'd like to learn more about this topic, just check out our website. As attendee of today's webinar, we'd like to make the next step easy for you. So use these discount codes to receive 25% off your next Global Knowledge course. So in the US, it's a webinar 25. In the Great White North, Canada, CA webinar 25. Finally, be sure to continue to visit Global Knowledge website to access additional free resources like technical articles, white papers, and webinars. Again, truly appreciate everyone joining in today. This is a fantastic turnout. Thank you again, Jared, for just an amazing presentation. We really appreciate it. Have a great day, everyone. Thank you.